Let me, just so I have it on tape, get your first and last name and the correct spelling of it. If you could go ahead and give me that, that would be great.
Oh, you mean, you want,
Russell Taylor?
oh, Russell E. Taylor, Russell, E, and Taylor.
Great. And you were in which branch of the service?
Navy, regular Navy.
Regular Navy.
I went in before the war and came out after it.
I'm learning the difference between the RN, the regular Navy, and the
Reserve and regular.
and also, God, I can't remember the one the gentleman was telling me about that he was in, and they weren't considered regular Navy.
Seabees.
Seabees, that's it.
Okay, that's construction battalion.
Yeah.
And those guys got in there. I had a brother-in-law that was a CB, and I had a very good friend that was a CB. And what happened there, these guys got rough work. They were like the engineers for the Army in a way, as I understand it. But they were had a lot of rough service, but they had afflictions of some kind, either back problem or one thing or another. One guy I knew, when we were young, he used to pick strawberries. You could go behind and pick as many strawberries. They found out he was colorblind, red-green blind. Oh. So colorblind people in the service were good because they could spot a guy up in a tree that was camouflaged. They see the silhouette. They don't see the colors. So they became an advantage. But he happened to end up being a mailman, and I don't know where all he went.
Huh.
And Walt, he was in for a while, and then he got out because he had too big a family. They found out that he should be home rather than there, and he was a toolmaker to boot. So
Everybody had a little different, different piece of the puzzle. Yeah. How did you get involved in the service? I mean, you.
Well, the draft came along, and Roosevelt. It was during 40 or so. They came in and put the draft. You had to sign up for a draft. So I signed up for it. I was working as a timekeeper and clerk in American Locomotive at the time. And I think, geez, if I got to go in the service, I don't want to go out in the mud. So I went down. I was going to join the Marines. Of course, they had those beautiful uniforms. But I happened to go down, and there was a Navy man there. I guess he was gunner mate first. And he talked me into it. He says, in the first place in the Navy, he says, you're apprentice seaman for only 3 months, and then you get seaman second. Well, then we were getting $21 a month. And seaman second got 36, and then, I don't know, 4 or 5 months you could get seaman first if you passed the test. That was 54, and then when you got third class, that was $60. So you're a big liver, with that kind of money. And it doesn't take long, but if you paid attention, didn't get in any trouble, because when you first get in the service, so many guys are homesick. In fact, we've had a couple that did commit suicide in training, one of them. But there was others that constantly went home, and their dad and parents would bring them back, and they would probably finally make it. But the point is that it's rough when you leave home young. I was 24, and I wasn't that bad. But anyway, that's why I joined the Navy. And he told me the aspects. He says, well, it's only 2 years longer because it's 6 years in the Navy and 4 years in the Marine Corps, I guess. I don't know. He says, only 2 more years, so I went. And after I was there a while, I really wanted to stay in the Navy. But things changed a little bit. I saw it differently. I mean, I'm too damn independent to be run around by somebody by the nose all my life. If I want to wear white socks, I wanted to wear white socks, and the rule was it had to be black socks in those days. You didn't change uniform. What was put on the bulletin board is what you wore. So things like that, after a while, if you're feisty, I guess, or miserable, whatever you want to call it. You don't want to do what everybody else does, but you mind the rules, so you keep clean and you don't get in trouble. That's the way I looked at it.
Now, when you got in, did you have any idea that there was a war coming?
Well, not really, but we were going to be drafted. So I got into the Navy before they sent me a draft notice to come down and get a number even. I didn't even have a number, as I showed you on that ticket over there. That was where I went over to the draft board as they had set it up and registered, that's all. And of course I got in the service, and by the time I got a call, I was already in the Navy. So,
wow.
And I didn't know what it would be, but whether I'd get sick, never even thought about seasickness, you know. But those things come and go. But it was a fun thing.
Because you saw some pretty rough...
Well, yeah. Matter of fact, we were transferring... with one of those pictures that I showed you of the Wichita rolling and pitching, so I think it was on that trip that I was steering. I was at the helm. Of course, every people get different stations, and I happen to be a helmsman. I happened to be a helmsman on each ship I was on, of which I was on five. But I was steering, and they were changing movies from us to the Quincy or the Vincennes, I've forgotten which. And as rough as it was, the ship was out there, and they got a line throwing gun. They throw a line over, and they were transferring, and some reason everybody left the bridge but me, and I'm up there, and the old man come up the other way, and he said, "Say, son, what are you doing up here all by yourself?" And I mean, I imagine somebody got chewed out for that, because that's leaving a lot of responsibility. He says, "You seem to be doing all right." Well, it was a fun thing for me, because taking a ship that's, I don't know how long the Witch was, but it was 500, maybe longer. When you got 9 guns, 3 forward and 3 aft, you know you got a long ship, because a gun in itself, we were called 855s, which means 8-inch bore, 55 lengths of it is the length of the gun. So that only gives you one thing if you were going to get down and calculate. But I imagine that, I think I have some pieces over there that show what ships I was on and what their lengths were and so forth. But the ship, you learn to steer by, there's a yawl that comes in when you got rough sea like that, and you can tell when the ship rises and falls what it's going to do, and you meet it, and you're always carrying port or starboard rudder, whichever the sea is making you do, so you can run a straight line, because you got to follow your binnacle or your course. So the old man said, "You seem to be doing all right." And then he went out, and pretty soon people began to appear pretty quick. So it was kind of fun and pretty exciting to do something like that.
Now, you ended up in North Africa?
Well, I started out, and we went down to Cuba and Puerto Rico and Guantanamo Bay, and that's all just before the war. I was in Iceland when the war was declared, when the Japs hit us on December 7th, 40. And at that time, the guy said, "Oh, that'll take about a couple of weeks to clean those guys up." Well, it wasn't a couple of weeks, as you people know. But anyway, while we were up there, we spent 2 or 3 times up there, I don't know, for a long period of time. But we would go out on patrol looking for the German submarines. On war patrol before the war was declared. When the Reuben James was sunk, was one of our destroyers was sunk. And then the Kearney was hit with a torpedo, but made it into Iceland. I went over and saw it, and I remember Roosevelt saying, "Boy, that shows what tough ships we got." Well, the difference was, if the Kearney or the Reuben James was on a roll like this, and it took a torpedo in the keel, and the security was on a roll like this, and it took shot high, so it didn't break the back of the ship, and it was able to come in. So at the time, but the majority of the United States didn't know that. In the world, we got tough ships.
And that was, it sounds like that was an important thing, kind of a positive propaganda.
No, well, that part was positive propaganda when they said our ships are tough, That's, of course, you got to say something. And we weren't in the war yet. These were I'm pretty sure those two were hit before the war actually happened. But we were out on patrol actually looking, and the old man says the next time General Quarters goes, it'll be the real thing. And I had a gun station in number 3 turret as a pointer, or a trainer, a pointer. And you got one shell deck. There's about 3 decks, shell deck and a powder deck, and I don't know what all. I've forgotten, but there's about 4 decks down underneath the turret itself. And there are 2 sets of powder rooms. And so we had one little colored guy. He was a mess attendant for the officers. And it was comical, but he was kind of a slow guy. But boy, when that General Quarters went, he was down there and he uncorked I don't know how many of those bags of powder. And you're only supposed to open 3 at a time, see, because 2 go to one gun and 1 to another. And that's because they got 2 elevators there that send it up in 2 separate rooms. And when the turret captain went down there, he says, "My God," he says, "there was those caps were all over." And he says, "They take a wrench to open," and he was doing it with his hand. So you can see somebody was excited. In fact, we all were pretty nervous.
I was going to say, was that when you first or when did you know that you were at war? I mean, you heard about Pearl Harbor, but
we knew we were at war before the war. We that were out there knew we were in a war in the Atlantic, at least. The Pacific, I don't think, knew it. But we were fighting the Germans because they were sinking our convoys. We went toward Murmansk, Russia, I think we started out with 32 ships from New York, and I think 4 of them got to Murmansk. They were sinking them pretty fast. The German bombers were coming out. We as we were there to protect the surface craft, but we were not to go in and mingle in the convoy itself. Because you got that many ships, and they're all out there, and one gets hit, you don't know what it's going to do. And when a ship gets blown up, it's like a flower pot on the 4th of July. I mean, if it's an ammunition ship, they go up. They go down pretty quick, too. It looks, you see it, you don't think too much about it. At the same time, it's pretty serious. I mean, it's serious. I don't mean that it's not. But I don't know how to put it. I mean, without saying it should never happen, but that's it. You're there, and you do what you're told to do, and you realize to protect yourself also. In each case, wherever you are on the ship, what you do, you must do it in spite of what's going on around you. If people are dying around you, you've got to still continue. Not him on the deck that's laying there bleeding. Your gun is more important because you are protecting yourself and everybody else that is alive. So you look like, first off, you look like a nut in a way that would say such a thing as, "The hell with him, keep at your station," But
that's part of war, isn't it? I mean,
definitely. Yeah, part of war. And when you're relaxed, you forget about it. You got a Red Book magazine, and it's got questions and answers, and we used to sit there and BS about those things, see? That was on the Wichita. Now, when we got on the Proteus, the Greenlit was a different thing. That was a mine layer. we carried about 800 mines, 600-pound mines, and we were sent to Africa. We sent to Gibraltar, and I think we went to. Well, first we were in Oran, and then we went to. No, first we were to Casablanca, then we went to Oran, and Mirza Kabir was over there, and I can't remember all of it anyway.
What did you do in Africa?
We went over to lay mines. We laid mines on the invasion of Sicily. We laid what was called deep mines, so if submarines came in, they would hit the deep mines, our ships could go over them. In other words, you got water this deep, and you got a mine down here, everything goes over it, but a submarine would come in and could hit them. So that's more or less what it was.
So what did those mines look like, and how did you?
They were 600-pound mines, about that big around. They had an anchor. Mechanisms of which is more or less. I'm sure they're not secret today, but they were more or less secret, and I think that's the way I should treat them today.
Oh, okay.
I mean, who knows what little thing goes in your head?
So when you set the mines, could you keep track of where they were, or you just?
No, we just dumped them. We were at the invasion of Sicily, and we could see guns shooting tanks on the beach. You could see the tanks jumping up in the air, and guys had already landed on the beach. And we were outside of the fight that was going on, although they were dropping bombs at us one time, but I think they miscalculated our speed, and they dropped ahead of us. You were still went ahead, detented your. In other words, you planted your bombs. Your mines. You pushed them over the side where you're supposed to. It was. I don't know how to play. It didn't bother me like it might have bothered somebody. Maybe I'm a little gone or something, but it's hard to explain how you feel when you're there. You know. When you got through with the operation, you went on laughing and maybe getting a little gilly if you could.
That's it's interesting, and that's the hardest thing to understand. I mean, I think you're exactly right. That's the hardest thing to explain because your mind does have to.
Well, you shift. I mean, when you go through an auto wreck, it's fearful. You're scared to death. When it's all over, you look at what silly thing happened, why it happened, or something else. You analyze it after, and you are not scared then. But at the moment, you're kind of you turn color. But you can't say you're scared the whole time, because that was one expression or one thing. Then when I got off of that, I was sent to submarine school. I wanted to go to submarine school, volunteered. And when I got there, I went to basic, and then I went to advanced school, which was gunnery, happened to be my rate. And one of the instructors said, "Hey, Gunner, would you like to be an instructor here?" And I thought, oh boy, 30 days on the beach, 30 more days. I got there and I stayed 15 months, I think, teaching school, both submarines and submarine torpedo tubes. The tube now, I understand, not the torpedoes, and also gunnery. And my classes consisted of any enlisted man that came through the school, no matter whether he's higher rate than I or lower. He still went through the school, and the same with the officers. They were my students, whether they were commanders or ensigns, they went through. It happens the two skippers, which was Jim Calvert. He was my executive officer on the submarine. He was the first one to go under the ice in the submarine. And the second one was Captain Anderson. He was a division officer on my division in the ship I was on, the Wichita. He was also a student of mine. He came through my school, or New London submarine base, through the base, and he was one of my classmates. One of my students, excuse me. So he ended up being an admiral too, I think. Calvert ended up was an admiral in charge of Annapolis at one time.
Oh, wow.
So they were interesting people, and because I was a rebel in the Navy, I didn't appreciate Navy life that much. I mean, while I was there, I enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, I was going to stay in the Navy till about the last year and a half before I got out. I was ready to stay for a 20 for life, or life, whatever you want to call it.
Wow.
And it would have been a good place, but I just didn't have the whatever to stay with it, I guess.
One thing you've talked about a couple of times, which, and I think I would have problems with that too, is being an independent person, and now you're in the Navy, and yes sir, no sir, you stand here, move there, do that. Was that tough for a lot of people?
Well, I don't know. You knew that, especially after the war was on, you either had to go to the Army, the Navy, or Marine Corps. When you were drafted, you had to go someplace. And sometimes your choice wasn't given to you, especially the draftees. They were drafted and they were sent into some of them were sent to the Navy, some were the Army, some were the Marines, where they needed them most, when. And then how much education you might have had, pre-education, that maybe you had a little college, or maybe you had a little flight experience on the outside, or who knows. So they kind of settle down and say, well, they direct you in the direction they think. And they aren't always right either. Now, I learned one thing when I was on the first ship. When recruits would come aboard, when I call them recruits, I was one once myself. But you come in, you look at these young men, and they're all dressed in the same uniform. It's something almost like Hitler said and did with his people. If you put them all naked there, they'd all be the same. When you're all in uniform, you're all the same. So after a while, it got so you could look at a guy and say, he's going to be a clerical man. Maybe he's going to be a yeoman or a storekeeper. Another guy just has a look that he'll be a machinist or an electrician, or maybe he'll be a carpenter or a ship fitter, which is sheet metal and stuff like that, or a gunner's mate or torpedo mate. Not definitely, but I did sort of get a feeling that I could predict, and it looked like I did for quite a few guys that I watched when they first came in, and they did get. Some guys say, "Oh, I know how to run a typewriter." Well, right away somebody runs a typewriter. So what does he do? He becomes a clerical man. Maybe you don't want to be, but he ends up there, and it's pretty hard to change horses in the middle of the stream. Once they put you there, you're there. That doesn't mean that you can't change, and I think you'd have the right to change, but that's the way I saw it anyway.
Huh. So it's interesting. I hadn't even discussed that with anybody, but the idea of the uniform and the uniformity, of course.
Yeah, well, that's true. Then all this garbage that they put on you here, that really doesn't mean anything. It means you were there. These Medal of Honors guys, and I think most of them will tell you, I didn't do any more than you'd have done. You saw your buddy or whatever, and you did it. So somebody else sees it, and for his regiment or his outfit, it puts a feather in their cap if he's got a Medal of Honor man in there. We were there where it was rough. The guy himself generally, I think he don't take it, hey, look, I got a Medal of Honor, and look at me. He's given, sure, he's due respect for what he did, but he didn't do it when he did it. He didn't think, I'm going to get a Medal of Honor. He went there he didn't even think about what he was doing. He went out there and grabbed that guy, or he did whatever he did, like that. Just like if you're going down the road and there's a car wreck and you see somebody that's hurt, you lift the fender up off of them or the car or pull them out of it if it's on fire. You do it without thinking for yourself. You can be in extreme danger. So they saw that this guy was in extreme danger. He could have been killed doing what he was doing. So somebody puts him in for a medal. And the higher it goes that is reviewed, the more impression it makes on that outfit, the more higher you might get. That's my opinion now. Don't think I'm right.
That's what's important, and that's what we want to hear is
Well,
people's personal view. I mean, history books, they kind of jade everything.
Well, history books sort of lie. I mean, I got a Muzzy at home that I looked at to see where I voted for my first president, and it started in 1930. Or Roosevelt started in 1933. He was elected in 32, and he went for 4 years. Every 4 years, 32 to 36 and 36 to 40. So in 1940, I voted for Roosevelt the first time I ever voted when I was old enough, 21. So that's an incidental. But I was just speaking about a history book.
Yeah.
And I often look at my old Muzzy because it goes to 39, and then it stops. And it makes you wonder, what's between 39 and now that I'm missing sometimes? It kind of makes me think, and I often go to a encyclopedia or something and look up something because I'm interested. I don't know if that's a way to go or not.
What was when you were on the ship and out at sea? I mean, after Pearl Harbor, and actually you talked about actually knowing you were in war long before Pearl Harbor, but what was a day like?
Well, in the first place, there's a watch, quarter, and station bill, they called it. Now, your watch, where you'd stand watch, your quarters, where you lived, and the station that you stood on for whatever your duty was. You got two duties in the Navy. One, you're a cook, and the other, you're a warrior. You're an artificer first, or second, but you're a warrior first. So, as a cook or baker on a ship, or a butcher, whatever, he may be on number 5 gun as a pointer, or he may be a loader, or he may be a track, whatever they call it, at the time, the job that he's got. Or he may be just throwing old casings over the side to clear the deck, who knows? But he has a job. That's what it amounts to. So you get up in the morning, and on the day, there's also a day sheet. Every day comes up. What uniform of the day will be. What time you'll scrub the decks down. Or you'll clean the compartment, or whatever you do. We were, fortunately, on the Wichita, we were considered the cleanest ship in the world, which is an honor in a way. It meant a lot to all of us. King George VI stood about as close as you are to me, inspecting the ship, and a few days later a Russian general came aboard, and that was up in Iceland, or Scapa Flow. I think we were in Scapa Flow at the time. It's just one of those things. You see those people, you can't talk to them, you stand there at attention and don't blink because somebody might get mad at you for blinking. So you do the best you can.
How much did the standard day change? I mean, when you're in battle.
Well, in the first place, you get up. I'm very fortunate. I'm very fortunate. I was on the Wichita. We saw what you could call battle stations. We never had, while I was on it, we never had that kind of action. I got off of that and I went on a mine layer. We laid mines, we were outside, so I didn't get shot at. I mean, they dropped bombs, but they missed. How do I know what went by? There was sometimes shrapnel laid on deck. How do we know if it wasn't our own that went up and exploded and come back down? You'll put your tin hat on and hope to God that that was like an umbrella. It covered all of you. But then you move on. You go from a mine layer to a submarine. You're in a tube, and you go down, and you stay down all day, and you come up, and you charge batteries at night. Of course, we have atomics now. They don't do that. They go down and they stay there. You don't know where they are, and they don't call back in. The Pentagon might know where they are, but we don't.
Now, did you spend? I know you talked about teaching subs. Did you actually spend time out in the subs?
Oh yeah. I put a war patrol.
Now, what do you mean by war patrol?
You went out. The day the Germans quit, I arrived in Saipan. We had one beer, went swimming, got on the ship, and went on a 40-day war patrol. We were still at war. And I don't know where all we went, but we were in that area of Japan that we surfaced right outside of Tokyo once. The war was on. We went to the surface, and they couldn't send an airplane out because they didn't have bombs, or they didn't have gas, or maybe they didn't have airplanes. I don't know what the reason was. What made our patrol successful, what we called a successful patrol, and what got that pin, which means nothing. The ship picked up a pilot that had lost his airplane, and he parachuted into the sea, and we picked him up. It was called a successful patrol. Am I a hero for that? No. Nobody else aboard was really a hero for it. We were there. They got radioed that he was shot down and X is the spot, approximately. He may be very lucky that we picked him up. I don't know. Maybe he wasn't. I don't know.
Huh. Now, so when you're in the sub, you really didn't have the faintest idea where, I mean, you kind of generally knew where you were, but...
I didn't really worry too much about it. I mean, I didn't know where Saipan was. I mean, I knew I was in Saipan, but what do I know about the world? Where's Hawaii? To you, it's an airplane jump from here to there. Well, Saipan is the same. Johnson Island is the same. Where they've dropped the atomic bombs. We've been past a lot of those islands. I crossed the international date line several times. I'm not a shellback. I never crossed the equator. But sometimes you have, I think we had Christmas like today and again tomorrow because we crossed the international date line. Then there was something else happened coming back. I remember that. It would just happen to be a notable day. It wasn't done purposely, but it worked that way.
What was your, when you were in the sub, what was your duty? What?
I was a gunner's mate. You have a 5-inch gun on the submarine there, and then you have 20 millimeters, I believe it was, and then there's 50 caliber machine guns that were brought up and put on mounts that were there. But the guns themselves were wet type guns, and you had to go up at night and clean them in the night because when you charge your batteries, and you're sort of vulnerable in a way because if they had an attack come and they said dive and you didn't get time to get back to the bridge, you'd be swimming. It's possible. It doesn't mean they're going to be.
Yeah.
It's just possible. And I'm sure they wouldn't have done it if they didn't have to. But the one thing you learn is when you go through submarine school, you've got to learn how to swim. If you don't know how to swim, don't get somebody else to swim for you, because you can do that. You know, you cheat. Well, we had a kid that was on a submarine that did that. He cheated. When the submarine went down, he was left topside and he drowned. Wow. It's serious business when they ask you to do something. You think, well, what are you going to do on a ship? What are you going to do in the ocean? Well, if he could have swum, he might have stayed up there and they might have got him.
So when you were on your sub, were you traveling as a group of subs, or
you're a lone wolf? You don't go as a group. That was when they called wolf packs, like the Germans talked about. I don't think they traveled 30 yards to each other, or there may have been. I don't know. I shouldn't even bring it what they might have done or might, because the movies do a lot of funny things with us. They steer us to think a lot of things that we shouldn't think. But be independent. Think for yourself. That's what I think.
What was what was the sub's job? What, as a whole, what were you?
Well, our ship, the USS Jack that I was on, had some considerable tonnage. I don't know how many tons of shipping. If a ship was a transport, 10,000 tons, is carrying cargo, in other words, ammunition and food, they know by the class what submarine it is, or what ship it is, excuse me. Likewise, if you got a troop carrier and you sink a troop carrier, you're knocking out a division or whatever it is they carry on that ship. So that's your job, to shortcut the war. That's all you are. You kill where you can. It's a fact of life. It's not what you want to do.
I assume a lot of what you were doing was breaking the supply line then.
That would be what you'd call it, breaking the supply line. I'm sure that there were some submarines that were involved in sinking Japanese aircraft carriers. They were there. They knew what was happening, or maybe airplanes had seen where they were heading, what direction. They knew they were going to whatever island the big fight was on at the time. So they may send 2 or 3 subs in that direction to intercept, or hope they would intercept some of those ships. Maybe they only want one major one that they can, if they can knock one major ship off. Never short yourself in learning on a submarine, no, if you went to that. A man on a submarine is supposed to learn everything from the bow to letting the anchor out to putting the flag up to practically cooking, not cooking, but any station in the ship, he's supposed to be able to open or close a valve. Let me go over and get a cough drop, would you?
You want a cough? So, you were talking about being on subs and people having to know every aspect of a. Oh, thank you.
Well, it's important. What I was trying to get at is, I think we lost some submarines in the Pacific during the war because every time they sunk something, the old man gets a ribbon or they get an honorary for the ship one way or another, and all the guys get a little dingled to stick up here. But they don't all learn, and they upgrade a guy, boom, like that, the whole bunch. Let's give everybody a raise. Well, they aren't really up to taking that raise. Learn your job. Learn your job and be sure you know what you're doing. Because everybody depends on you and you depend on everybody. It's somewhat why I left the Navy. I was a little disappointed in a way by some of my fellow shipmates, and although the war was over, it was over after I got off the submarine. I was on the Proteus when the war was actually over, delivering mail to another ship. But if you don't know what you're doing, or you don't think you know your job, you better learn, because it's important that you do right. If they put you in a car and you didn't know how to shift gears, you wouldn't start steering it and running down the road without knowing where you're going to do what you're going to do. Otherwise, you're going to get in trouble. Likewise with anything. Oh, geez. Well, anyway.
What's that? Well, I always hear stories about subs, but tell me about living on a sub. What's that like? Where you sleep and eat?
Well, that was great in a way. You got compartments and there's doors all through the ship. When you go to battle, all doors are closed. In the compartment you're in, it happened I lived in the forward part of the ship, in where the torpedo tubes are. My bunkmate was a torpedo. My bunk was right next to a torpedo. And it's likewise the other guys. My battle station was, I believe, if I remember correctly, was on a bow plane or stern plane, which is what makes a ship go up and down, in the front and the stern of the ship. At that time, I don't know what they got now, but they've got to have stabilizing of something. But in the back, there was not like a rudder, in a sense, a rudder down on horizontal. So there's two guys one's operating bow planes, one in the stern planes. you got to coordinate. Otherwise, your ship would be doing this all day. And the funny thing, under the sea, when you start getting it turning, it's hard to stop it because you overcorrect and you don't stop your overcorrection quick enough. Then it goes the other way. It's not hard once you learn, but it's interesting too.
Did you get fired on it all, or depth charges or anything?
Not while I was on it. The ship was hit one time with a 1,000-pound bomb, but they had dove, and then when they saw this airplane, and I don't know how deep they were, but about periscope depth is 60 feet. So just how deep they were, they had been at periscope depth. They went to dive, and this bomb was dropped close enough that it knocked all power out. The ship went in a dive right straight down. Guys that were in their bunks was on the forward bulkhead. It took them down to about 400 feet before they regained control. Somebody was able to close the electrical circuit to get things going again. So those things happen. I don't know the ins and outs of all it, so I shouldn't say much about it. But,
Sure.
But the ship survived, and that's important.
Now, you were on at least one vessel that was carrying aircraft.
Well, that was a heavy cruiser.
That was which?
A heavy cruiser.
Heavy cruiser?
Yeah. USS Wichita. Beautiful ship. Pranced beautifully in the sea. I love to see a ship. Frenchmen make a beautiful ship too. I've seen them when you're on watch and you're going across the ocean with a convoy. You can appreciate one ship over another, the way it prances, if you will. They're beautiful.
Huh. Now tell me about the launching of these seaplanes that were.
Oh well, that's technically a catapult is nothing more than a sled that's on greased tracks and a big block and tackle system. And the piston is on one of the block and tackle, and there's a gun hooked to this piston, just like in your car. You fire the gun and it pushes that down. And when that pushes, it pulls all these cables and pulls that car down from 0 to 60, 70 miles an hour. And of course, your ship's got to be on the correct roll or you pitch them into the sea. And then you pull the car back and you redo it again or put a second plane. Of course, we only carried, I think, 5 planes, and sometimes we had to keep 2 of them up on the catapults strapped on those cars. But they were more or less scouting observation planes. In other words, they could go 30 or 40 miles out, and if they go 30, 40 miles out and up so high and got radio contact with the ship, they can see as far the other way. So they can see over the horizon, which we can't see. They also use them for target practicing. They would have a raft 20 miles away or whatever it was supposed to be, and I can't remember that. They would spot for the ship. In other words, they splash to the right, to the left, to see if we were going where we're supposed to, you know.
Oh, so you could set your guns. So
yeah,
you knew
that. They would read it back to the ship, and they'd send it up to the people that figure all that out, and it's sent back down to the guns. Then the guns aim where they tell you.
Huh.
So you don't see what you're shooting at, hopefully.
Boy, that's the amazing thing. A, that you don't see what you're shooting at, and B, that they could actually hit something from this ship that is doing this out.
Well, our Navy has a pretty good record of being good marksmen. Over the military, which sits on the beach, their gun sits on the beach, we had a better reputation of hitting our targets, which were moving. You remember, the target you're shooting at is moving forward and rolling and pitching. Also, you're zigzagging under war conditions to keep out of harm's way. You're zigzagging, so you're zigging and they're zagging. It's all got to be calculated in so you can hit X. So, but after that, I went to a rest camp after the submarine trip. War was over when after rest camp, I went to Camp Dealey in Guam. Got back to the ship and they sent me to the Proteus, transferred me off. We didn't see eye to eye, didn't want to stay there, so I was off. Afterwards, they found out I had done something which they didn't know ahead of time, that I had taught torpedo tubes, and the chief told me, or my officer, division officer said, he would have made me first class, but that didn't count. Too late, I'm off. Huh. So then I was on the Proteus. The Proteus is a submarine tender. They're the workshop of all the submarines. They come back to them and are refitted or put torpedoes on them or do anything needed to be done mechanically, you know. And then I got transferred from the Proteus to the Greenlet, which is a submarine tender, a submarine rescue vessel, from a tender to a rescue vessel. And the reason for that was they were going back to the States and I didn't have enough service, no points, because I was a regular Navy. Reserves got points. After so many points, they were sent home. Well, I was a regular Navy and I had so much time to do it, so they just put me on a Greenlet and I stayed in Japan. Well, we brought 3 Japanese submarines, aircraft carrying submarines, back to Pearl Harbor. Our people were trained to run their ships, not off of our ship, but our sailors from other submarines were trained to bring those back. Of course, they were running surface only. And they were brought into Pearl. They may be somewhere in Pearl Harbor today, I don't know.
So these were captured?
Well, no, they surrendered. They had surrendered. The war was over, they surrendered. After the atomic bombs were dropped, they had surrendered. Some of those pictures I showed you over there were in the harbor, that one Japanese aircraft carrier and 8 submarines alongside of it. Then there were innumerable one-man subs and two-man subs. They had a lot of small stuff like that. They're suicide, really. Put a man in it, he's just like putting himself in a single torpedo, and he'll steer it in and go with it. He's a goner, just like the kamikazes, they called them.
So you had one picture on a beach, and you had a sub behind you. Was that one of the little subs? Do you remember?
Yeah, that was a 2-man Jap sub. That was on Guam, at Camp Dealey in Guam. Mm-hmm.
So they had the kamikaze pilots and they had the kamikaze...
You could call them kamikazes. A 2-man sub is, if they launch that a long ways away from home base, they're not going to have much battery because they don't have enough engine to charge them. Either they charge them with batteries or maybe they got a small engine. I have no idea. I really can't make a comment on it.
Yeah, wow.
It would be stupid to say something that I don't know.
Did they actually have a little torpedo in those, or
They had torpedoes, I imagine some of them, like a 2-man sub, they probably had 1, maybe 2 torpedoes. I don't know. Maybe 1 forward and 1 aft to balance the ship.
Huh.
I don't know.
See, now it's interesting because being in the Navy, as you described it, you kind of, even though you're a part of the action, you're a distance from the action usually, correct?
Oh, yeah,
Like Sicily, for example.
Oh, yeah, well, from Sicily, we came from Africa across to Sicily. It was a rough trip. You could see the planes going over. I saw the ships loading with soldiers getting ready to go. Excuse me.
Sure. Talking about Sicily. I was asking about you were offshore from Sicily, but
Oh,
you could
yeah.
watch.
Did I what?
You could watch the war from your mines.
Well, yeah, from where we were busy dropping mines, and then sometimes when the airplanes would come over, we'd be up there shooting at them, German planes when they came. We even shot at our own once by accident at night. They didn't drop the flares. They were supposed to. The Philly was right near us, which is a heavy cruiser. They also shot at them. I know that those guys are probably pretty mad at us, but they didn't drop a flare or anything. We didn't know who they were.
So is that's how they would signal you that?
Yeah, it was like red, green, red, or maybe another combination would be dropped, and then 4 hours later it would be something else, and we knew this ahead of time what they would be. Well, they didn't drop any. They went so close that I could see in the cockpit as he went by, because he was flying that close to the water. And from my gun station, I could see the luminous dials, so you could tell we were pretty close to each other.
Wow.
But we were shooting at them, they weren't shooting at us, see, so. That was a bad thing, but it happened, and
Well,
those are accidents that happen.
that's what it seems. I mean, because you have so many people, and the communication of that time versus today, trying to keep track of who's where, and that's the thing that amazes me.
When our guns started shooting, the old man was outraged that our guns started shooting without permission. But we had a Commodore aboard, fortunately, that saved us from getting in trouble. He said, "What would you have done if you'd been out there?" Fortunately, I overheard that this conversation went on. But he was ready to throw us all in the brig back there because we didn't get permission to shoot. But when you see something that close, you don't wait.
That's interesting. I never thought about that. So if you're at your gun station, they say man stations or whatever they say, and you're up there and you're on watch.
You don't just do something because you want to, because you think. How do you know what we did was probably wrong? But on the other hand, the way the Commodore saw it, what would you have done if you were there, back there? Guys, are no flares or anything in their airplanes. You can hear them. What do you do? So we opened up, and the Philly shot at them too. God, I need another cough drop. I got one over there. In the Navy, I was you might say a little boy, a farm boy. Even though I was 24 years old, I lived in a little world in the village, upper New York. And your scope isn't very big. Today's people travel everywhere. I mean, it's nothing to say, well, I'm going over to Hawaii today, or go back to New York, or Paris, or any place else you want to go. I was a little boy that lived in the scope of a farm country, farm community. I wasn't a farmer myself, although I worked at it once in a while. But I think I learned a lot. One of the first things I remember saying to some of the guys, because you always hear, my state's the best. Whoa, I said, wait a minute, let's talk about it. You'd have to live in every state a year before you could say one's the best. This best stuff is just in the head of us children of the world.
That's an interesting thing that you talk about living in a small world. And a lot of the vets that I've talked to, probably one of the biggest lessons they got from World War II was an amazing geography lesson.
Oh yeah. Today your kids today don't have a geography lesson, even though they teach. I don't think, because you ask them what's this. They'll name a state's capital as a country, or as a state, or they'll call a state a capital somewhere. When I learned geography, I happened to be raised in New York. We learned every town what they were noted for. I can tell you today, Jamestown, New York, which is on the other side of my state, was grapes and furniture.
Wow.
Gloversville was naturally gloves. leather products.
Huh.
Amsterdam is rugs. Even today, it's rugs. Mohawk mills.
How about the places that because your journeys while you were in the Navy were pretty amazing. I mean, you talked about Iceland. You talked about being in Africa, Sicily.
Africa, Scotland, England. I took a ride from Edinburgh, Scotland to London. Started out in Edinburgh in the daytime or night, and ended up in King's Cross Station. And I don't know if I brought those papers out, but I got pictures of me on first American sailors arriving in London since World War I. I thought I had them over there. I don't remember now.
I think they're over there, yeah.
At any rate, it's our education. We're living so too fast to learn education in the way we used to. I think that's a fact. Kids are pretty fast. They're fast learners. They're bright kids. But I'm 83 now and having a good time, just like a 16-year-old yet. I feel 16. I look at it that way. It was I don't know how else to play it.
Do you think that there's a message from World War II for future generations?
Well, I think just like this little debacle going on in Israel and Palestine. Look at it as we look at the United States is today. But what happened when the Europeans came over, they met an Indian, they pushed him. And they pushed him. They traded beads for an island because he didn't have concept of beads, not because he was dumb. He didn't know what beads were. It was different. If you brought pieces from the moon down here, you'd give anything to have a piece of it, wouldn't you? Well, that was the same thing there. We pushed the Indians, and that concept, remember what we did to them. Now think of the Jews and the Arabs are in the same thing. They're pushing each other. There's no need of that. It's just like black people. I got a good friend that was a submariner. He's a chief of a boat. He's a black man, a wonderful guy. I like him. I love him. And because I do, some people say, oh, geez, what's the matter with you? What are you doing with him? Hey, he's a good human being. He was a submariner. He worked. He saved lives. He knew what the hell he was doing. He works in this type of submarine, atomic submarine. He wasn't even born when I was running around the world doing some of these things. But we met because he had a sticker on his car, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing? What ship are you on?" We got talking, and it was very interesting. We had a lot of good exchanges. Huh. Wonderful man.
When you were, when we were at war, in your mind, as a 20-some-year-old kid out there on these ships, who was the enemy, or what was it you or we were fighting against?
Well, I'll give you another thing. When I was in North Africa, I ran around on the shore whenever I got a chance to. I went over where they had prisoner of war, where the Italians were. It was a big fenced-in area, and there were guards there. But all of a sudden, I looked at all these kids, and I thought about the high school. There's redheads, brown hair, black hair, blue eyes, black eyes, brown eyes. They were just like us. Except they talked blah, 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 blah. We didn't understand them. It was Italian. Who are we? The same with the Germans. They stood up. When they marched the prisoners of war down to the ship, the Italians were singing the Beer Bell Polka. When they marched the Germans down, they sung like a military march. They marched down there. They were proud people. And I got to appreciate them. I wasn't mad at them. I mean, they did what they did like I was doing what I was doing. I was told by my government, you got to go over there and hit them. Because if you don't, you're going to hit different. So that's the way I looked at it. People are people over the world. They got to learn to say hello, how are you? And instead of saying, hey, you Jew or you nigger or you wop or what, that don't count. That's terrible. I think that is terrible. Excuse me.
That's okay. That's okay. These are tough issues. I mean, it's...
Well, the way I see it, I think it's stupid what they're doing over there over nothing. Look at what the difference is. One's using guns, one's using slingshots. One's creating a confrontation because they're trying to get attention. I shouldn't even talk politics because that's what that is. I'm not here for politics, but politics is important.
Do you think that war, I mean, is war people or is war politics?
War is politics. War is dollars. Why do you think we wanted to go to Korea or somewhere else? There's gold or there's iron or there's oil. We want to control it. We want this. Don't think we're free from guilt. There's too many people that are... We the little people don't see this. We aren't really told. We know a little bit, but what can we really do about it? It takes a lot of thinking. It's going to be people with much more brains than I got but I wouldn't know what to say, except man is put here for man to be appreciated. Like the Indians, they always prayed to a tree if they cut it for a boat, or they prayed to the melon almost that we're going to cut to eat. They had respect. It came from something greater than they. It was put there for them, but they thanked whatever. I hope that people could really appreciate what they're, and think a little. This stuff about kids, putting people in jail for drugs is a stupid thing in a way, because the kids that are pushing this, especially taking a vote away from people that are stupid because somebody give you an aspirin to begin with, if you call it an aspirin. Parents do it at home. What they do in their home is not good for their kids. I smoke cigarettes. I got one lung today, but I like cigarettes. They were cheap. When I started, they were a nickel a pack on the ship. Yeah, 50 cents a carton. Or was it $1? I don't know. There was 20.
They're about $3 or $4 a pack today.
I know.
Huh. What do you do for fun in the Navy? I noticed you had a few beer passes. Excuse me.
Well, when you went to a place like that, they gave you a couple of beers. You couldn't bring liquor aboard ship. You're not supposed to bring liquor aboard ship. Sometimes the accidents happen, but I'm sure the stars. I even had a chaplain on board the Wichita come out serving liquor when we were up there, and we got hit 3 times. We were hit by a ship 3 times one day. That is, rammed due to a storm and ran aground. And this chaplain had a bag on his side and giving guys shots.
I noticed that you carefully worded that to not supposed to bring.
Well, hey, the law is the law, you know. One time I brought about 4 or 5 bottles of alcohol from a Japanese subbase aboard. And how I did it, we were supposed to go over and pick up souvenirs. Well, there were bags that you had the souvenirs in. I had 2 bottles, 1 on each leg, and 3 in the bag. And I said, why should everybody get caught? I'll just take it all aboard for it. When I got aboard, even the master at arms on the ship got a bottle. Geez, one guy got so sick that he was really, I was going to take him down to sick bay. And the next thing you know, he's up there drinking again. I said, oh, stupid, you know.